for the savant is not worth it because it causes so many problems in relationships and things like that. But the main thing to understand is that intelligence comes at a cost. So for example, if we look at this paper over here, this is really fascinating. So high intelligence, a risk factor for psychological and physiological overexcitabilities. Implicates high IQ as being a potential risk factor for affective disorders, ADHD, ASD, and for increased incidence of disease related to immune dysregulation. So it's really fascinating, but I want to explain to you all how this works. So if you have a high IQ, your cognitive ability is better. If your cognitive ability is better, you are able to perform more calculations. If you can perform more calculations, you can develop a stronger predictive model of the future. And as your ability to make robust models for the future increases, your anxiety increases directly in proportion to that. So people with high IQ have higher anxiety because when they go into a situation, they are able to see all of the things that could go wrong. And if we think about what is anxiety, anxiety is looking into the future and being able to predict problems. I'm worried that I could fail the test. I'm worried that I could get stuck in traffic on the way home. Anxiety is literally the ability to predict problems. There's a problem, though, with anxiety and giftedness, which is that normally the way that the number of problems that we want to predict needs to be in proportion with our ability to do something about it. Right? Why do we get anxious? So we can predict a problem and do something. Oh my goodness, I could fail my test. Oh, to avoid that, let me study, right? So prediction of problem, implementation of solution, 1-to-1. And at 100 IQ, the problems that most human beings predict are solvable. But IQ has a big problem, which is that if I only have 2 hands and I only have 24 hours in a day, but I can predict 100 problems, I can't solve all of those problems. Like literally, I want y'all to understand this. There is a gap between my ability to detect problems and for me to be able to implement solutions because I am bounded by time, space, and reality. But my mind can make predictive models. This is why people who are gifted struggle with anxiety. Hey y'all, if you're interested in applying some of the principles that we share to actually create change in your life, check out Dr. K's Guide to Mental Health. There are actually 2 sources for anxiety. One is cognitive and one is physiologic. For the majority of people, reassurance becomes something that you become dependent on. You're not really dealing with the root of the anxiety, and it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where the more socially anxious you become, the more awkward you appear, and then it kind of becomes this vicious cycle. So check out the link in the bio and start your journey today. And then this creates another problem, right? Which is now I'm making 100 predictions. I can only do 10 solutions. And then I'm able to predict the consequence of 90 problems that have no solutions. Oh my God, I need to do so much. Where do I start? It's too much to do. How do I know it's going to work? Overwhelm. So that then fuels the fire, which is why we see these papers that show that high IQ results in a risk of ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, things like that. Next thing to understand, just this is another interesting point, is that people who have high IQ are more likely to ruminate. They're more likely to get stuck in their head thinking the same thoughts over and over and over again, right? Because if there are 100 problems to solve and my hands can only solve 10, if I only have 24 hours in a day, what is the smart person going to do? They're going to lean into their strengths. Let me see if I can perform a calculation to reduce 100 problems to 99. How can I figure out this situation so that I have to do less? Because the only way this works, I can only do 10 things and there's 90 left. So let me see if I can perform some calculations to reduce 100 to 90 and 90 to 80 and 80 to 70 and 60 to 50, 50 to 40, 40 to 30, down to 20, and then eventually 10, and then I can work. They're literally more prone to rumination and thinking to solve problems. And then they end up getting stuck because now what's happening is instead of solving those 10 because those 10 isn't enough, then what? They spend their energy in reducing 100 to 90. They spend all of their time trying to whittle down their problem to something solvable instead of solving, instead of working. They focus on compressing the problem. How do I go to a party and be confident? How do I go to a party and not feel anxious? How do I figure out which major is going to be right so that I stay engaged with it, I don't get bored, and has good job opportunities by the time I graduate? They're always trying to mold the problem into something solvable instead of take one step forward, because that is their solution strategy, right? The brain learns how to do this, and they learn how to do this at a very young age. That's why they're called gifted. So early on, this works. Oh, I want to play video games all day. I don't want to study for my math test. How do I solve this problem? Oh, I know. I'll just pay attention in school so that I don't have to study. And if I pay attention in school, then I can come home and I never have to study. They figure out problems. They figure out solutions. And this is the problem, is that they develop a strategy that only works at low rank, right? I'm going to rapid expand every game. Just going to rapid expand because people at my rank never use rush strats. So they start to develop bad habits. Why do they develop bad habits? Because they can get away with it. People who have a high basic metabolic rate, a fast metabolism, oftentimes have terrible eating habits. Because whether they eat Twinkies or whether they eat salad, they stay thin. So they're not given the opportunity to, this is what's so tricky about life. So many of the people that I work with, the higher the capability is, the harder it is to live up to your potential, because you're saddling all of these bad habits that there was never any corrective evolutionary pressure for, right? And that's why we get to some of these really interesting statistics. Let me see if I can find them for y'all. To think rationally means to adopt appropriate goals, take appropriate action given one's goals and beliefs, and hold beliefs that are commensurate with available evidence. Intelligence tests measure many important things about thinking, but they do not directly assess the degree of rationality of thought. Thus, it is perhaps not surprising that intelligence is quite weakly related to at least some aspects of rational thought, okay? This I know sounds weird, but basically, if we look at intelligence, this is what's kind of hard to understand. So I think about high IQ is a very strong beast that you're trying to leash. So high IQ is prone to rumination. So what happens with people who are really intelligent, right, is they'll come into my office and they'll say oh, I have anxiety. And the problem, and they're like, I know it's anxiety, but I can't get it to stop. So the animal at the end of their leash is so much stronger than they are. When it starts to think in a particular way, they have an undisciplined mind. And an undisciplined mind that is really, really strong, if I have a 200-pound or 800-pound tiger at the end of a leash, it's going to be harder to control than a 60-pound golden retriever. This is the problem that people with intelligence face.